I don't know what you were doing when you were 8 years old, but I'm pretty sure you weren't standing in a courtroom going toe-to-toe with a seasoned prosecutor trying to save your grandmother's life. But that's exactly what Marcus Johnson did. It happened on a cold Monday morning in Brooklyn. The courtroom was packed, the kind of case where everyone had already made up their mind. 72-year-old Dorothy Johnson was being accused of stealing over $17,000 from a local housing assistance program. She had run it for 15 years without pay, but now she was being painted as a thief, a fraud, just another name in a long line of people the system swallows whole. She had no lawyer. Her public defender dropped her case last minute when it became clear she couldn't pay. And just when it seemed like all hope was gone, this little boy, no taller than the judge's bench, stood up and said, "Your Honor, I'd like to say something for my grandmother." The entire courtroom froze. Even Judge Carter, a man who had spent 30 years on the bench, put down his pen and looked up. "Son, you should be in school," he said, half smiling, trying to soften the moment. But Marcus didn't flinch. "I know, sir, but my grandmother can't be here alone. Her heart can't handle the stress, and her lawyer quit yesterday, so I'm here to help." At the prosecution table, David Richardson, sharpsuit gray hair and a reputation for winning, let out an audible sigh. He was known for his 95% conviction rate, a bulldog when it came to financial crimes. And he wasn't about to entertain a child in his courtroom. "Your Honor, this is absurd. A minor can't represent anyone in court." Marcus didn't blink. "I'm not trying to be a lawyer, sir. I just want to tell the truth." That was all it took. The judge leaned forward, curious now. "All right, Marcus. You have 5 minutes to speak, as a witness only." What followed wasn't just a heartfelt plea from a kid who loved his grandma. It was a dismantling, a strategic, organized, well-researched unraveling of everything the prosecution thought they had. Marcus opened a manila folder packed with notes, receipts, and even newspaper clippings. "Every Sunday," he began, "me and Grandma go over the program's books together at the kitchen table. I color-code the receipts. Blue for expenses, yellow for income. It's how she taught me math." He pulled out highlighted spreadsheets and color-coded charts he had made himself. The jurors leaned forward. The courtroom had gone from skeptical to stunned. Richardson looked annoyed. "With all due respect, Your Honor, this child is clearly parroting what the defendant told him. He has no real understanding of financial fraud." Marcus didn't get defensive. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked the man in the eye and said, "Sir, I learned to read court documents when I was 6. It was the only way I could talk to my grandmother after my parents died." That landed like a punch to the chest. People in the courtroom actually gasped. You see, Marcus had been living with Dorothy ever since a drunk driver killed his parents. He blamed himself. They were on their way home from his school play. For months, he didn't speak. Dorothy spent every night reading aloud from legal books and explaining things like due process and evidence. She was trying to pull him back to life the only way she knew how. Eventually, he started asking questions. Then he started researching on his own. Dorothy, who had once volunteered helping neighbors with rent disputes, soon realized her grandson wasn't just smart. He had a gift. A memory like a vault and a way of seeing through confusion to the heart of the matter. "Your Honor," Marcus continued, "we found something strange in the program's account. On September 12, 2000, $500, 0 cents, was withdrawn for emergency roof repairs, but the next day we went to the community center and the roof was untouched. I even took a photo." He held up a printed photo from an old cell phone. The roof looked pristine. Then came more withdrawals, $1,800, 0 cents, for security upgrades that never arrived. $3,200, 0 cents, for legal counsel Dorothy never hired. She always used pro bono lawyers, Marcus said. She never paid anyone. He looked over at Richardson. "Did your team check if the companies paid for these services even exist?" Silence. Richardson shifted in his seat. "The investigation focused on her responsibilities as administrator." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "So, you assumed she was guilty because she was in charge, but you never checked where the money actually went?" It was Brutal, calm, respectful, but brutal. And it kept coming. He held up a sheet comparing two sets of signatures. These are supposed to be my grandma's, but they don't match her real signature, the pressure's different, the loops are off. I learned about handwriting analysis at the library. Are we really accepting a child's opinion on handwriting? Richardson scoffed. Marcus stayed cool. Do you have a certified handwriting expert proving the signatures are real? Richardson had nothing. Then you can't prove my grandma signed those documents. This wasn't just a boy trying to save someone he loved. This was a strategic takedown of an entire lazy investigation. And behind the scenes, he wasn't doing this alone. A retired librarian named Patricia Williams had taken Marcus under her wing. She'd worked as a paralegal for over 30 years. When Marcus started showing up at the library every afternoon asking for legal textbooks, she saw something special. Together they built a presentation. She taught him how to order evidence, how to phrase questions that exposed gaps, and most importantly, how to stay calm when people tried to belittle him. But it wasn't just intelligence on display in that courtroom. It was heart and fire, and the kind of courage most adults wouldn't have. And Marcus was just getting started. Your Honor? Marcus said, flipping through another section of his folder. This is the hospital record from September 12th, the day the first $2,500.00 withdrawal happened. He passed it to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. It shows Grandma was at Brooklyn Methodist Hospital with me from 1 to 5 p.m. I had an asthma attack. She never left my side. The judge's eyes narrowed as he read the timestamp. That 2:30 p.m. transaction couldn't have been made by Dorothy if she was at the hospital with her grandson. Richardson stood abruptly. Your Honor, this document wasn't submitted during the discovery process. Marcus didn't miss a beat. Dr. Richardson, did you submit any evidence proving Grandma Dorothy was physically present when the money disappeared? That question hit like a gavel strike. No, he hadn't. Not once had the prosecution proved her physical involvement. They assumed guilt based on her title, not her actions. And one more thing, Marcus added, voice steady. Did your team review the security footage from the housing program office? The prosecutor scoffed. The cameras weren't operational that day. Marcus looked directly at him. That's interesting, because I called the building security company last week. They said the cameras were functioning perfectly, and they offered me the footage for free to help my grandmother. The courtroom broke into hushed chatter. Even the jury was shifting in their seats now, whispering, eyebrows raised. Richardson's jaw tensed. He realized this wasn't going to be a walk in the park. This wasn't a sympathy act. It was an indictment. And how exactly did you get all this information, young man? Richardson asked, his voice tight with irritation. Marcus didn't blink. Simple. When you love someone, you don't wait for someone else to fight for them. You learn how. And then he pulled out the final envelope, sealed, labeled, heavy in his small hands like it carried the fate of more than just his grandmother. I wasn't going to show this yet, he said softly. I wanted to give the real thief a chance to step forward, but they didn't. So here we are. The courtroom held its breath. Inside this envelope, Marcus said, is proof of who actually stole the money. He turned toward the prosecutor. Dr. Richardson, would you like to withdraw the charges against Grandma Dorothy before I open this? A long, dangerous pause. Richardson's expression flickered. Guilt, panic, pride, fear, all tangled into one clenched jaw. Young man, he said finally, I'm not going to be blackmailed by a child in my courtroom. So, Marcus opened the envelope, and out came a USB drive and a printed transcript. This is a recorded phone call from September 15th, Marcus said, on a government office line, which, by the way, clearly states all calls may be recorded for transparency. He pressed play, and the courtroom went still. Richardson's voice rang out through the speakers. Tony, I need this thing with the old lady done fast. Don't care if she's guilty. I can't let my conviction rate dip before the AG election. A second voice, cautious, answered. You sure about that? What if someone digs? They won't, Richardson's voice said flatly. She's poor, she's old, she's black, nobody's going to care. The courtroom erupted. Murmurs turned to gasps. Gasps turned to open disgust. The jury looked horrified. Richardson stumbled backward. That recording is inadmissible. It's illegal. Nope, Marcus replied, flipping through his folder. Mrs. Patricia taught me about recording laws. Public office lines with posted disclaimers are fair game. Then came the text messages. Printed copies, Richardson again. No need to check vendors or signatures. Just pin it on the administrator. Wrap in 2 weeks. Judge Carter looked like he'd aged 10 years in 5 minutes. His hand gripped the gavel, but didn't strike. He wasn't ready to end this. He wanted to see where it went. Marcus turned back to the room. But this next document, he said, this is the one that proves everything. He held up a bank statement. It was from Richardson's personal account. October 2nd, Marcus said, 3 days after Grandma was charged. He received a $25,000 0-cents deposit from a company that had issued 2 of the fake service invoices. The room gasped again. Richardson finally collapsed into his chair, silent, pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Dr. Richardson, Marcus said quietly, you didn't just accuse an innocent woman. You did it to protect yourself. The judge's voice finally cut through the noise. This is unbelievable, he muttered. Dorothy, who had been silent all this time, stood up slowly. I gave my life to that program, she said. You tried to take my dignity. You tried to take my grandson's future. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just stood with quiet, unmistakable strength. Dr. Richardson, the judge said, his voice gravelly, I am dismissing all charges against Dorothy Johnson, and I am ordering an immediate investigation into your conduct, including prosecutorial misconduct, corruption, and fraud. Richardson tried to stand and speak, but stumbled again, all that swagger gone. And Marcus? He turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I didn't do this for revenge. I did it because I love my grandmother, and because kids like me need to see that justice can still work, if we're brave enough to fight for it. The courtroom exploded into applause. Some of the jurors were crying. Reporters scribbled furiously. Security began escorting Richardson out of the room, head low. But for everyone watching, it wasn't about his fall. It was about the rise of an 8-year-old boy with a binder full of facts, a heart full of fire, and the wisdom of someone who had already learned what most adults still hadn't, that the system only wins when we stop believing it can be held accountable. And Marcus Johnson? He wasn't done yet. 6 months later, Marcus Johnson sat in the front row of a law school auditorium, not as a student, but as the guest speaker. 9 years old, dressed in a simple blue blazer, his now famous binder resting on his lap, like a badge of honor. The room was packed. 300 future lawyers, some twice his height, quieted when he stepped to the podium. He didn't speak like a prodigy. He spoke like a boy who had seen the world for what it was and decided to change it anyway. Real justice, Marcus began, isn't about winning arguments. It's about protecting people, especially the ones no one else wants to protect. In the front row, Dorothy Johnson wiped a tear from her cheek. Her health had improved, her smile had returned, and she now walked with her head higher than ever before, no longer just a community worker, now a symbol of resilience, a voice for the voiceless. After the trial, donations poured in for the housing program she had run so faithfully. New management was brought in, honest, transparent, efficient. The organization became a national model, and Dorothy was asked to consult with housing authorities in other cities. Marcus often joined her, binder in hand, asking questions, taking notes, and without even trying, changing how adults saw justice, one conversation at a time. But not everyone landed on their feet. David Richardson, once seen as a rising star, had been convicted of fraud, misconduct, and accepting bribes. He lost his license to practice law and served a 2-year sentence. When released, he moved to a small town upstate and quietly worked in an insurance office where no one knew his past. He wrote letters from prison, apologies, pleas. He even tried to meet Dorothy in person. She refused, not out of spite, but out of clarity. Some wounds, she once told Marcus, don't need forgiveness, they need truth, and we got that. That's enough. Marcus never gloated about Richardson's fall. When asked about him, he simply said, I feel sorry for him, for someone who had so much power and chose to use it to hurt others. That honesty, simple, grounded, was what people loved about Marcus. A woman named Patricia Williams, his mentor, his second grandmother in all but name, was still by his side. The two had created a grassroots project after the trial. It started as a small workshop at the local library, a few kids, some donated books, and a whiteboard. Today, it's known as the Marcus Project. It operates in over 25 public schools across Brooklyn, teaching kids about their basic legal rights. Not law school jargon, real practical knowledge. How to read a contract, what to do if you're unfairly treated at school, how to ask questions and demand fair treatment without fear. Knowledge without character is dangerous, Patricia told a crowd once, but character with knowledge? That's how we change the world. Law schools across the country added the Johnson precedent to their ethics courses. Prosecutors were now required in many states to present clear evidence that defendants were physically present at the time of alleged crimes. It became known as the Marcus Law, and it all started with an 8-year-old boy who refused to let the system bulldoze the woman who raised him. Judge Carter, the man who'd once told Marcus he belonged in school, kept a framed photo of that courtroom moment on his desk. A reminder, he said, that justice sometimes comes in the smallest packages. He became a tougher reviewer of prosecutorial evidence and trained dozens of new judges, using the Johnson case as a case study in due process. People would occasionally stop Marcus and ask, "Are you going to be a lawyer someday?" He never gave the easy answer. "I'm not sure," he'd say. "Maybe, but I know I want to help people see they have more power than they think. You don't have to be a lawyer to fight for the truth." Even with all the attention, Marcus stayed grounded. He played basketball at school, got in trouble for staying up too late playing Minecraft, loved cartoons on Sunday mornings, and grilled cheese sandwiches on rainy days. Dorothy made sure of that. She didn't want her grandson to become a symbol at the cost of his childhood, but in moments when he stood in front of a microphone or held a piece of evidence like a seasoned attorney, you saw something else, a kid born into grief. Forged in injustice, raised in love, armed with truth. During one school visit, a 5th grader raised her hand and asked, "What was the scariest part of standing up in court?" Marcus thought for a moment. "Honestly, I was scared the whole time," he admitted. "But I remembered what my grandma said, that fear is just a feeling. It can't stop you unless you let it. So I told myself, just do the next right thing, one step at a time." And that's how he fought the system, one question at a time, one receipt at a time, one truth at a time. Today, Dorothy Johnson is known across New York as a housing reform advocate and the Brooklyn Citizen of the Year. But she still lives in the same neighborhood in the same little apartment, with the same Sunday ritual. Only now, she and Marcus sit at the kitchen table, not just checking receipts, but reading letters. From families around the country, kids who watched the trial and found their voice, grandmothers who fought back against unfair accusations, lawyers who changed how they practiced because of one boy and his binder. And Marcus? He says he doesn't want to be famous. He just wants the system to be better. So if you've ever felt powerless, if you've ever watched someone you love get mistreated, if you've ever been told you're too small, too young, too late to make a difference, remember this. Sometimes the greatest revolutions don't begin with shouting. They begin with an 8-year-old boy, a grandmother who never gave up, and a simple belief that truth and love always win. And if that story touched you, if it reminded you that courage can live in any body, any age, any zip code, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Not because of the algorithm, but because the world needs more stories like this. And maybe, one day, yours will be one of them.